When we think about the American Revolution, we picture this big fight for liberty, right? But what if I told you that right in the heart of the new republic in New York City, a completely different and way more complicated battle for freedom was just getting started? We're going to dive into the story of slavery and abolition in New York, a story that's often overlooked, about a place struggling with a massive contradiction at its very core. And to really get a grip on this contradiction, we have to start with a number. This one. By the middle of the 1700s, that's how many enslaved people there were in New York City. We're talking over 14% of the entire population, one of the largest concentrations anywhere in British North America. This wasn't some distant issue happening down south. It was woven into the very fabric of daily life in the North. And make no mistake, this system was absolutely brutal. This quote comes from a New York newspaper ad in 1796 for a runaway slave, and it ends with that chilling threat. It's just a stark reminder that this whole system was held together by force and by fear. I mean, human beings were advertised like property, and their descriptions often included prominent scars from past punishments as identifying marks. So in this explainer, we're going to break down how this reality was finally challenged. We'll kick things off with New York's central contradiction, then we'll meet the pretty unlikely alliance that formed to fight it, we'll get into their forefront strategy, track their 15-year political slog, and finally, really examine the complicated reality of the gradual freedom they eventually won. Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. After the Revolution, New York was a city of these incredible, soaring ideals, and a very, very grim reality. It was a state founded on the principle of liberty that was also, at the exact same time, a major hub of American slavery. What's so jarring when you look at this is just the sheer gap between words and actions. On one side, you have all this powerful language from the Revolution. You've got leaders like Alexander Hamilton talking about the need to escape the slavery of British rule. And then you look at the other side. The city's own census data shows the number of enslaved people was going up and up for nearly a century. This wasn't some kind of hidden hypocrisy. It was a fundamental conflict playing out right in the open. And this whole system was locked down by a web of really oppressive laws. For an owner to free an enslaved person, they had to pay a 200-pound bond. That's a massive amount of money, designed to make it almost impossible. Free Black people? Legally banned from owning property. There were night curfews, and if you were caught out, you could be publicly whipped. Even this thing called half-freedom was basically a trap. It meant you still owed payments to your former master, and your children would still be born into slavery. The whole system was designed to control every single aspect of a person's life. But in 1785, a group of prominent men decided it was time to confront this contradiction head-on. They formed the New York Society for the Manumission of Slaves, and their goal was huge: the eventual abolition of slavery in the entire state. So who were these guys? Well, if you look at the group's makeup, it tells you a lot. Out of the 19 founders, at least 10 of them were Quakers. Now, the Society of Friends, the Quakers, they were way ahead of the curve on this. They were the earliest, most organized voice against slavery, and they even disowned members who refused to free the people they enslaved. So that moral conviction, that was really the bedrock of this whole new movement. But here is where we hit the deepest, most difficult paradox of all. The society's most famous leaders, the guys lending it all their prestige, they were slave owners themselves. John Jay, the first president, would argue that America's prayers for liberty were impious as long as slavery existed, all while he continued to own and even buy and sell human beings. Alexander Hamilton, he advocated for giving enslaved men their freedom for fighting in the war, while his own household records show his family was buying and selling enslaved people. They were actively fighting a system that they were still a part of. It's just a mind-bending contradiction. So how did this complicated, conflicted group actually try to dismantle something as big as slavery? Well, they knew that just making moral arguments wasn't going to be enough. They had to get methodical. They came up with a multi-pronged strategy to attack slavery from pretty much every angle they could think of. Their plan was basically a four-pronged attack. First, they went to the courts. They fought like crazy against the kidnapping of free Black New Yorkers who were being illegally grabbed and sold down south. Second, they focused on education. They started the African Free School to directly push back against the racist idea that Black people were intellectually inferior. Third, they launched a PR campaign, writing pamphlets, connecting with other abolitionist groups to get the word out. And finally, everything they did was aimed at their biggest goal: lobbying politicians to pass a law that would finally end slavery in New York. But that ultimate goal, changing the law, man, that turned out to be an exhausting 15-year marathon. It was a political battle that had to be fought inch by inch against really powerful economic interests and just deep-seated prejudice. This was not a quick or easy win. Not at all. You can kind of see the whole struggle on this timeline. Their very first attempt, back in '85, it failed because pro-slavery politicians snuck in a poison pill, an amendment that would have taken away voting rights from free black men, so they had to pull the bill. But they kept at it. A huge turning point comes in 1795, when their own first president, John Jay, gets elected governor. Now they've got a powerful ally in the governor's mansion. And that leads, finally, to 1799, when Governor Jay signs the law they had been fighting for since the very beginning. So after 15 years of fighting, what did this big victory actually look like? Well, the Act for the Gradual Abolition of Slavery was a massive deal, a real landmark. But the name itself is the key. The freedom it offered was anything but immediate. Okay, so this is the crucial part. The law did not free a single person who was already enslaved on the day it was passed, not one. Instead, it said that children born to enslaved mothers after July 4th, 1799 would eventually be free. But even for them, freedom was a very distant promise. They were forced to work as indentured servants for their mother's owner for decades, until age 28 for men and 25 for women. It was a huge compromise. It ended the idea of slavery lasting forever, but it delayed actual freedom for an entire other generation. And that leaves us with a really tough question. Was this gradual, painfully slow process a pragmatic, necessary compromise? Maybe the only way to actually dismantle such a powerful institution in that time? Or was it a profound betrayal of the very ideals of liberty and equality that these men said they were fighting for? It's a question that gets right at the complicated and often contradictory legacy of the founding generation itself.